Carl Landers was a 69 years old fellow who used to live in Chicago of United States. He had a wife, 2 girls and a son. He was an engineer by trade, but for 10 years before his retirement, he worked for train heating and air conditioning as a salesperson. One of Carl's main hobbies was to run every morning. He won a race lottery and was allowed to run the 100th anniversary of the Boston Marathon. As he got older, he decided to climb the highest peak in every county in California. He had climbed lots of mountains in the state and always had another one in his agenda. In May of 1998, he headed for Mount Shasta. He climbed the mountain but didn't earn the summit. He slid down with his ice axe and promised himself to come back and conquer it later. 1 year later, in May of 1999, he went back to the mountain with two of his long-term best friends, Barry and Milt. Carl made the 5-hour drive alone and met the other two men on his arrival. He had met these two friends in the running club that he used to attend to. Barry later stated Carl wasn't an astonishing athlete, but he enjoyed the challenge. The men stayed in a motel room in Mount Shasta City the night before they started their climb. They were well prepared. They had ice axes, crampons for their boots and other necessary tools. At 4 a.m., they drove to the trailhead at Bunny Flat for the Mount Shasta summit. This area is beautiful and hundreds of people attempt to summit this mountain every year. Sometimes there are dozens of climbers in the trail. There was still snow on the ground at the time Carl and his friends tried to climb this mountain. They decided to hike 3 to 4 miles up the mountain until they reach a location named Horse Camp. After a short time into the trip, Carl had to go behind the tree because he had diarrhea. The men continued until they reached the location called 50-50, which was a major stop for most climbers. The wind was blowing hard when they decided to stop at 50-50. They pulled out their tent and set it up in the snow to spend the night. Carl had to leave the tent couple times for his diarrhea, but other than that, everything seemed normal. In the early morning, the wind was going even stronger than the day before and made the tent unstable. They saw groups of people decided to try their chance another time and they were going down. Carl and his friends decided to stay in their sleeping bags in the tent. The tent was positioned tight against the mountain, so they were fairly protected. They waited few more hours until the wind subsided and saw groups of people climbing up again. Carl and friends decided to climb a little bit to reach the Lake Helen. In the back of their mind, they didn't think they would summit that day. They were thinking they go to the lake and see what happens with the weather. Barry and Milt started to packing up when they saw Carl standing and staring to nothingness. He appeared to be getting cold. They told Carl to start walking towards the lake and they would meet him there. The lake was a short trip just around the corner of the mountain. Barry told Carl that he and Milt would finish packing up and be on the trail quickly. Carl and Milt left the packed tent at 50-50 and inside of 30 minutes they were heading for the lake just a little behind Carl. Around halfway through the trip, Barry wasn't feeling well. He told Milt he would go back to 50-50, grab his tent and meet the others at his car. Milt said that was fine. He walked to the lake and saw around 20 to 24 campsites. He asked the ranger who was working there whether he saw another man had passed through and continued to climb. The ranger responded he only saw one man had gone up and he had taken the casual route. Milt took off immediately in case the climber was Carl. He got within 100 yards from the climber, but he was way too fast to catch and way too fast to be Carl. So Milt headed back to the lake. Once he arrived at the lake, he again asked the ranger if he saw anybody with Carl's description had passed through. He said no. Milt went back to 50-50 praying Carl was waiting there, but he wasn't. Carl's and Milt's backpacks were still there, but Barry's backpack was with him in the car. It was 5 p.m. at this point. Milt waited another hour and decided to take his backpack and go back to Barry. He left Carl's backpack in the 50-50 in case he returned. Once Milt reached Barry, they called the sheriff department and reported Carl as missing. The search started the next morning. There was a huge search in the area, and at this point Barry called Carl's wife and notified her of the incident. Another Carl's friend flew Carl's wife and the other two men's wife to the area. Milt stated later on that there was no place for Carl to hide. It was as if he just vanished. Milt and Barry decided to go to 50-50 again and search the area. Carl's pack was still there. They again asked the rangers in the area if they saw Carl, but nobody had seen him. They didn't find any trace of Carl in the mountain. At some point, Milt was so frustrated that he asked some psychics about Carl. One stated he was in a body of water. Another stated he was in a crevasse, and it would be many years before he would be found. The sheriff that was responsible for the search stated it was as if the mountain opened up and swallowed him. According to local legends, beings called Lemurians live underneath of Mount Shasta. They believe they took Carl. To this day, nobody knows what happened to him. On January 22nd of 2002, Christopher Tompkins, with 20 years of age at 8:10 a.m., drove to his work site with the business owner. They worked in a surveying company close to a wooded section of Ellerslie, Georgia. He worked the morning hours with 3 other men without any problems. Right after lunch, the 4-man group started walking 50 feet apart from each other to move to a new location. Work associates last saw Chris at the back of the group near the side of the road. 1 minute later, the crew looked behind and Chris was gone. There was no trace of him anywhere. When fellow employees went back to check on Chris, they saw a barbed wire fence which was separating a private property from the road. They saw one of the Chris's boots lying near the fence and some coins lying near the boot on the ground. They also saw the tools that Chris was carrying scattered around the area. The owner of the business called Chris's mother and explained what happened. They waited until 4:15 and they called the sheriff and reported him as missing. When the authorities came to the scene, they found a piece of blue cloth on the barbed wire which matched the blue jean Chris was wearing at the time. The area of the other side of the fence was a heavily wooded section with swamps and snakes which most don't go. Almost a year later, the owner of the land reported he found Chris's other boot in the field. There would be no way anybody would walk that area without shoes. They never found Chris, and to this day nobody knows what happened to him. The Connor family lived in a suburb of Greenburgh, New York. They had 4 children and lived in an area known as an upper-end area of nice homes and fairly wealthy people. The area was on the edge of a forest with lots of water and heavy timber. On July 13th of 1934, Bobby Connor, with 21 months of age, was with an older neighborhood friend playing at their residence. At 5 p.m., Bobby's mother called the neighbor and said it was time for Bobby to come home. When Bobby was returning back home, he stopped at a sand pile near an abandoned automobile and started to play. The older friend of Bobby, who was playing with him, told him it was time to go home, but he refused and continued to play. So his friend went to Bobby's house and let his mother know that she needs to come and get him herself. When she reached the sand pile, Bobby had vanished. Family and neighbors searched for Bobby until dark and then called the authorities and asked for help. Police brought in bloodhound dogs and volunteers, but nothing was found. the bloodhounds couldn't pick up a scent. After not finding any trace of Bobby, the police started to suspect there might be an abduction in play. Police actually searched the neighborhood for any suspect and arrested the peddler and held him in custody. After not finding anything for 4 days, the police started to assume Bobby couldn't survive the cold weather for 5 days. On the 5th day, however, around 2:45 p.m., the search group was going over an area that was searched dozens of times before when they saw a wall in a bramble thicket where the grass appeared to be trampled down. They went farther and saw the little Bobby lying on his back. He was alive. The area was 3/4 of a mile from his residence. Bobby was taken to a hospital and found to be starving and ill from exposure. After finding Bobby, the police gave their thoughts on the incident. They believed Bobby was kidnapped and was placed later on in the area they found him. They couldn't find any mosquito bites or sunburn on Bobby's body, despite being out for 5 days. There was only scratches on his body. It's worth mentioning that Bobby didn't have his shoes and socks at the time he was found. Searchers found one of Bobby's shoes 13 feet higher than where he was found on a bush, and a little bit farther they found the second shoe. They couldn't explain how the shoes got that high. How Bobby was able to dodge the searchers for 5 days remains a mystery to this day.